Hey guys, the RSW here. Are you looking for a DK tank that is great for veteran and hard mode content? Then this build might be for you. So, what is this tank? So this tank is a DK which has some subclassing elements, and this can be adjusted to your liking with in terms of the stats as well as some of the skills. Feel free to switch it about. This is not set in stone, and this build is meant for mainly dungeons. However, it can be adjusted in certain areas to be able to cater for veteran trials, and it's mainly for vets and hard modes. That's what I use it for. So, yeah. And please feel free to drop a subscribe, a comment, anything you like, any support, or even criticism is appreciated here. So, yeah, let's get right into it. Alright, so let's buff up and we're going to get straight into the stats. So, as you can see, we are sitting at 22k max mag, we have just under 41k health, we have 25k max stam, and we have 2.1k mag recovery, 1.1k health recovery, and just under 700 stamina recovery. We are sitting at 31k spell resistance and just under 31k physical resistance. And this is what I'm using in my stat distribution. However, you can change this around. Quite a lot of the time I will take more points out of health just to put into stamina or magicka, just because 41k is a lot for me. And we're using the Atronach Mundus Stone to give us extra magical recovery. As I will say, this is all changeable. Anything you see on here you can change. If you want extra resistance, feel free to get that. The cap is 33k, and if you want different stat allocation, then go for it. If you want 64 into health, you can. Whatever you feel like doing, this is all changeable. Alright, moving on. We are a Nord for this build. I know a lot of my builds are Imperial, you can use that as well, but for this one, personally, I'm a Nord. Now, what the Nord does is you get increased duration when you use a drink. So, if you're using something like that, you're getting an extra 15 minutes, which is just nice. Moving on, you get extra max health and you get frost resistance. The max health is nice because it means you can take some points out of health and put it into other things. So that's one reason we're using it. We also get max stam, and also whenever you take damage, you get 5 ultimate, and this can happen once every 10 seconds. So every 10 seconds, you're going to be getting an additional 5 ultimate towards your ultimate skill. So that's just nice. And then finally, you get the extra resistances, which is also nice because, as I say, with the health, you can take it out of your other stats and be able to then have that made up for with this passive. But the main reason we use it is for the extra ult, which is just nice. As I say, if you want extra sustain, however, I would go for Imperial. Imperial is much better if you're having sustain issues in general. But personally, I'm using Nord on this. Alright, let's talk about foods and potions. So, we are using Bewitched Sugar Skulls. Another option is obviously using Longfin. However, just bear in mind, this does not come with the extra health recovery. So, Bewitched Sugar Skulls should be your go-to. However, if you can't afford it or you can't craft it, Longfin can be picked up for much cheaper. As I'm going to say in all of my tank videos, I tank with max stats, and that's what I'm used to tanking with. However, I will give a mention to what a lot of other people will use, which is Jewels of Misrule. So if you're someone that prefers Jewels of Misrule, then use Jewels of Misrule. Personally, I'm used to using Sugar Skulls with max stats and having higher max stats and less sustain. However, if you tank with Jewels of Misrule, you will have more sustain but less overall resources. So that's just something just to keep in mind. Moving on to potions, which is pretty default for any tanks these days, and even DDs in most cases, and that is tri-stat potions. Currently, I'm just using up some of my crown ones. However, obviously you can get crafted ones, or as I say, you can pick them up from the guild traders. Or someone can craft them for you if you can't craft them yourself, as long as you have the resources. So yeah, we're using tri-stats, and that will just be throughout any content. So yeah. Alright, so let's talk about the gear. So we are using the Master's Sword and Shield on the front bar. We have the sword in defending with restore health. We then have reinforced on the shield with a tri-stat enchant. And what Masters does is whenever you use Puncher, which is a taunt skill, you get healed for just under 6k health, and you also gain resistances equal to the amount that you heal. And this is just really nice. It's just extra passive healing, and this is something that I like to take on quite a lot of my tanks. Um, I don't have the perfected on, however, I would use the perfected. This is just what I had, and I haven't changed it, so that's something I need to change. So yeah, if you have the perfected, use the perfected. Now onto the back bar, we are using the Ice Staff of Turning Tide, so this will be our back bar set, and we have this in infused with a Crusher enchant. And what this set does is when you block, specifically on your back bar, because that's where the set is, you will then gain a buff for 10 seconds. Now, this buff stays on you depending on what bar you're on. Like, if you go onto your front bar, you will still have this 10-second buff, but you have to get the proc from your back bar. So just keep that in mind. So once you have this buff, it lasts for 10 seconds, and you can then bash, and it sends out this wave, which hits up to 6 enemies in front of you, and it applies major vulnerability for 10 seconds, which then increases the damage that they take by 10%, and this can happen once every 15 seconds, so it has a 5-second cooldown, so to say, and this scales off of your max health. So yeah, great set, comes from a dungeon, so it's not too bad to get, and yeah, this comes from Shipwright specifically, just to put it out there, and yeah, moving on, we are now using Archdruid, which in retrospect is the same buff as Turning Tide, but the reason we're using this is so we have a larger uptime on major vulnerability. And the way that this works is you heavy attack, and after 1.2 seconds, it does shock damage to 6 enemies within an area in front of you. So basically the same as Turning Tide, but slightly different. And this applies major vulnerability for 7 seconds and has the same 15-second cooldown. And what you want to do is you want to alternate between this and Turning Tide, so then that way, when this is on cooldown, you will have Archdruid up, so it basically maintains the uptime of vulnerability, and that's why we're using both. And another thing you can do is, if your group has the DPS, you can proc Archdruid on one ad pool. When that ad pool dies, you move to the next, and then you can proc your Turning Tide and just alter between the two of them. So that's why I use this. And just to clarify, we have one medium piece, we then have one light. This is just for undaunted passives. However, you can go double heavy if you prefer. You can go one medium, one heavy, one light, one heavy, etc. Just do what you want. This is just what I'm personally using. A lot of people will prefer having double heavy nowadays. So yeah, that's up to you. But the head we have in Tristat, and we have that in Divines, and then the shoulder we also have in Divines with Max Mag. Enchantments on armor, really up to you as well. As I say, depending on what stats you're looking for, go for different things. Personally, I have Divines on these two pieces just to bring up my Mundus stone slightly. So yeah, that's something that you can do, but you can alter it around. Now onto the body set, we are using Perfected Lucent Echoes, and on the chest we have it in Reinforced. The rest of the pieces will then be in Sturdy, other than the legs, which are in Reinforced. So this is a trial set, so you will get that free set bonus of basically reduces your damage taken from dungeon trials and arena monsters by 5%, which is just really nice. And what this set does is, while you have more than 50% health, the critical damage and critical healing of any group member that isn't in this set will be increased by 11%. Great for your DDs, great for your healer, just really nice. And then obviously the second part of the set, when you were below 50% health, then the damage taken from monsters is reduced by 20%. This is worded kind of funky, but what it means by monsters is basically any enemy in the game that's going to slap you. So yeah, this will work anywhere, and that basically just means if you're on low health, you're getting 20% damage reduction, which is really nice. It just means the healers have more of a chance to burst heal you up before you could potentially die, and it just means you're a little bit more survivable in those situations where you're taking a lot of damage. Um, the thing is with these sets, switch them around however you like. If you want different sets, use different sets. It's completely up to you. And as I say, I'm using sturdy on most pieces. The big pieces I'm using reinforced, and then I have 2 pieces in divines. Just a bit of variation, but yeah, that sturdy just helps with that block cost with the max resources. One thing I will mention is if you were using Jewels of Mithril and that sort of thing, swap the sturdy pieces for divines, and you'll be good to go. And then finally, obviously, we have Turning Tide on the jewelry, and this is another thing, the enchants and stuff can be changed around to your liking. Personally, I use 3-piece infused. I have one with reduced the cost of magicka abilities, and then I have 2 flat mag recovery ones. This is what works for me. If you want harmony, use harmony. If you want different things, like maybe you want flat magical recovery on all of them, then go for it. If you want to adjust these around to your liking, just do so. It's up to you. On to skills. So, as I said, this is a subclass tank. However, we are a DK at base. So we are using Earthenheart, we are using Winter's Embrace, and we are using Bone Tyrant. So these are the ones that I've personally picked up, and that is what this build would be based around. So I'm going to get into the skills that we are using. So on the front bar, we have Lingering Flare. This is something that you can swap out for other skills if you want. However, it is mainly there just for the passive reduction in damage that you take by 10%. So that's why that's there. It's just there as a passive, and you don't need to cast it. It's just, as I say, it's just on your bar. Moving on, we have balance, and this is another skill that can be interchanged for example, beckoning armor. If you prefer beckoning armor, then go for it. This is something I swap around depending on situations. If I need the extra sustain in certain things, I will use balance. If I don't, then I use beckoning armor. This really does vary depending on whether it's a fight that I know I'm going to be kind of alone a little bit more and might need the extra sustain, or whether I just need just the resistance with the buffs from Beckon and normal. Um, so what balance does is you cast it and it gives you a resistance buff, same as Beckon and armor. However, what this does is it converts health into magical, and that basically means if you're low on mag and you have a bunch of health, you can cast this a couple of times and you will basically gain mag but lose health. One thing to keep in mind, when you cast this for 4 seconds after you cast it, it reduces your healing done and your damage shield strength by 50%. So just keep that in mind. You do not want to be casting this before you're trying to heal, because it just will not help whatsoever. However, this is something that I do use just because in between ad pulls, I can use this a couple of times. By the time I'm at the next ad pull, I'm healed up, I'm good to go, and I have extra resources quicker. As I say, this is something you can swap out for beckoning armor, which, you know, gives you the resistance buff, and it also pulls things in and taunts them for you. So this is something that you can swap out if you prefer. As I say, just mess around with it. It's up to you what you prefer out of those. Moving on, we then have Pierce Armor, aka Puncher, and this is your main taunt on your front bar, and what it's doing is it's taunting the enemy for 15 seconds, and also applying Major and Minor Breach for 15 seconds, which reduces the resistances of that enemy. This is single target, so just keep that in mind, and this will be your main taunt for those big enemies. Moving on, we have Igneous Shield, and this is a small-ish damage shield that you can proc, and it scales off your max health. And when you proc this, you also gain Major Mending, increasing your healing done by 16% for 3 seconds. And the reason we're using this is, one, you can spam it. It gives a damage shield to you and your group. So in heal checks, this can help out the healer as well as just the DDs that are up. And another reason is obviously you get Major Mending, which then means after you use this, you can use your self heal, which is Polar Wind, and it will just buff it, making it a much bigger heal. And that's just really nice to have. So that's why we're using Igneous Shields. And as I said, Polar Wind will be our heal, and this is from the Warden line. And what this does is you instantly heal for 13,000 health, and you then heal over time after that. So you get the initial big proc of 13k health back, which can crit, so that can be way more. And then after that, for 10 seconds, every 2 second intervals, you're going to be healing for 3.5k. So this is a burst heal and a heal over time. And on top of that, you also heal a nearby ally for just under 9k health, and this all scales off of your max health. So not only that, if you see someone next to you on low health, you can proc this, heal them, heals you, just really nice heal. Now finally onto our ultimate on our front bar, we have Barrier. This is one that you can swap around. Personally I'm using Barrier in this scenario, however if you want something more selfish you can use something like Magma Shield, or Magma Shell should I say, that is the morph. But personally Reviving Barrier is quite nice. It has a heal as well as the damage shield, so you proc this, you give everyone around you a big damage shield, they heal underneath it, and yeah, what's not to like. So moving on to the back bar, I will start off with the ultimate. We are using Aggressive Horn. This is the War Horn skill from the PvP lines, specifically Assault. And what this does is you cast this and it gives everyone 10% increase to their max mag and max stamina for 30 seconds. And then for 10 seconds, they also get Major Force, which increases their critical damage by 20% for the duration. So, yeah, really nice. You want to pop this during damage phases, especially burst phases, and you can rotate this with the healer if they're using this as well. So yeah, really nice skill. Next, we are using Inner Rage. Sorry, this is our range taunt ability, and it has a 28-meter range to it, and it costs mag. And what this does is it taunts the enemy for 15 seconds, and a ally can activate it to do fire damage, which then does additional over time to enemies nearby. But as I say, this is mainly used just for the taunt at range. If something's aggroed on your DDs at a distance, you can then control the fight by using this and taunting things at a distance. I will say as well, you can use the taunt from the Destro stuff. However, personally, I prefer this just because it has a bit extra range and it also doesn't immobilize. So yeah, that's why I'm using that. Next, we have Leashin Soul. This is a scribing skill, and what I have personally put on it is obviously Pull, which is the main reason we're using this. We then have Restore Magicka and Stamina, and we then have Major Maim, which reduces the damage done by 10% of the enemy hit by this. And this is your pull ability. It's a single target one. You can make AoE ones out of other skills, so that is something to just keep in mind. However, personally, this is what I use most of the time. Um, as we've dropped the skill line here, which would usually have the DK's chain, that's why we're using this, because it's Magicka based, and yeah, you can swap this out for the stamina version, which is, if I can find it, Silver Leash. This is another option. It's stamina based and it's a little bit different. However, it isn't as strong, so just keep that in mind. Um, but yeah, that's why we're using that one. It's just a bit stronger in my opinion than Silver Leash. However, as I say, you can mess around with that if you want. Next, we have Gripping Shard, and this is a immobilize skill, and it also applies a snare. So, what you want to do, pull things in with Leech's all, and everything will be all grouped up. You then can proc this on them, which will immobilize them for 3 seconds, do damage over time, as well as snaring them by 30%, which means they're not moving as quickly, which just helps you control the ads a little bit easier, so that's why that's on here. This is another thing you can swap out for other things if you prefer, but I just like having that bit of control in the ad pools while I'm using this, so that's why it's here. Next, we have Blockade of Frost, and this will proc our Crusher, and this is from the Destro skill line. And what this is a big AoE. You slam it down on the floor. You get a shield for it because it's the Frost version, as well as it does frost damage over time, applying things like brittle, and this also applies breach and a snare as well. So this is nice for control as well as your proc for crusher enchant on your backbar. Now, finally, is our only Necro skill. However, I think this is probably one of the best skills there is in the game. And this is Deaden Pain. So, what this does is you consume the corpses on the floor, and it gives you ultimate. And it also helps because it has a passive of you basically taking less damage by 3%. So this is just, while it's slotted, you don't have to use it for that passive. But yeah, 3% reduction in the damage you take is just nice. And yeah, this also heals you. So what's not to like? You're getting ult, you're getting heals, you're getting extra damage reduction. So yeah, that's why we're using that. Alright, let's talk about the passives, and I'm also going to mention a couple of other options of skills along the way. So first and first, in Earthen Root, one skill to mention is Igneous Weapons. This grants major brutality and sorcery. If your group does not have a source of this, then this is great. It lasts for over a minute, which means you rarely need to reapply this, which is really nice. So this is just a skill to keep an eye on if you do want it for your group. Another one which I haven't got unlocked is Stone Fist. This is something which, as a tank in trials most of the time, especially if you're going for like trifecta runs and stuff like that, is something that people will use, and it will basically give a damage buff when you have the morph of it. So that's another one to keep in mind as well. But moving on to the main thing we're talking about, which is the passives. I won't go into too much detail here, but you want to take all the ones from here, especially Battle Roar. Battle Roar is whenever you cast an ultimate, you're restoring health, magicka, and stamina for each point spent, which means you're getting a huge heal, you're getting a bunch of resources back, and it's just nice. Every time you're using your ult, you're going to get this, so that's just something that you can't pass up, in my opinion. As for the rest, you know, you're getting minor brutality for your group whenever you cast a skill from the skill line, and also restoring stam. And then obviously you want this one as well because it's increasing your duration on some of these skills, which is just nice. Moving on to Winter's Embrace, we are also taking all of them. We're getting extra resistance from frozen armor, we increase our status effect chance, as well as just various other things here. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I will hover over these. But they're mainly just resistance stuff and things that increase our block, and yeah, they're just nice to have. Moving on, we also have all of the ones here. As we do have one slotted on the back bar, we do get the benefits from all of this. So, as I say, I won't go into too much detail. However, this one I will mention, as this is really nice, and this is reducing our damage taken, which is just really, really nice. Moving on, we obviously have the other ones. This one will say 0 at the moment. However, if you're on the back bar, you get 3%. Increase in healing. And then some extra max health, which yet again is just really nice. Means you can take some points out of health. Okay, moving on to the one-hand and shield, and we are taking all of these. Yet again, they're just helping us with our block cost reduction, as well as just things that will help us with mitigation, as well as the cost reduction and things like that. I will just hover over these, so if you want to read them, you can. However, I won't go into too much detail. Next, we have destruction stuff, and yet again, we're taking all of them. This one, I just haven't put points into because I don't have that many skill points left, so that's why I don't have that. However, I would just pick that up for the sake of it. Yet again, I will hover over these. However, there is one I will go into detail at the end, which is going to be Trifocus, which, if you scroll down, you can see when you're using Ice Staff, you will block with mag instead of stamina. The reason I'm mentioning this one specifically is just because if you want to block with mag on your back bar, you want to pick this up. If you don't, then you don't want to pick this up. This is something that is preference, and depending on what you want, will depend on whether you take this or not. Personally, I'm taking it on this build. However, on some other builds, I might not. So just keep that in mind. Moving on, we are taking passives from light armor. I won't go into too much detail, but as I'm using one piece light, one piece medium, I do take some passives off of these. And eventually you would want to take all of them just to have. Same with medium. I've prioritized the main ones that I care about. However, you might as well just take all of them, as I say. I won't go into detail, but I will hover over them. Then finally, heavy. This is the one that you 100% want to prioritize your points into, as this is going to give you the most beneficial things. The one thing I will mention as well is if you want to use full heavy armor, use full heavy armor. You will get the extra resistance from this. You will get the extra like buffs coming from the passives here. Gives you max health, gives you some sustain, as well as just, you know, the damage reduction and stuff like that. So yeah. Now, moving on, Fighters Guild, I don't personally take any, however, you can take some of these if you want. Mages Guild, just an honourable mention here is Warden Contingency. I personally have built this to basically be a heal with a damage shield. This is something I do slot sometimes, and this is a really, really nice skill. So just keep that in mind. You can edit this the way that you want, but this is what I personally use. Now, moving down to the passives, we mainly want to take these three because it's reducing the cost of balance. It's also making it so it increases the duration, as well as you just get some extra passive recovery just for having it slotted. So that's why we pick up those. Moving on, we do have both passives from Undaunted, and the first one is just giving us extra resources whenever you activate a synergy, and the second one is then giving us a 6% buff to our max health, stamina, and magicka, so that's why we're taking that. Honorable mention to Overflowing Altar as well. This is another one that I do sometimes slot on my back bar. This is basically a huge burst heal for your group when they take the synergy from it, and it also does a small heal over time, so that's also nice to have. Moving on, this is something I mention in every single build because I just think people just don't pay attention enough to this, and this is Continual Attack. It gives you Gallop at all times, increasing your mount's movement speed by 15%, so for general use this is absolutely huge. Do not pass this up in general. You only need 1 point into it to get that 15%. But yeah, that's just, it's not necessary to do with the build, it's just something I mention in every video. And then finally, support. We are picking up the first passive, which increases our magicka recovery by 10% for each support ability slotted. As we have flare on our front bar as well as barrier, we are getting 20% extra recovery for mag on our front bar, so that's why we're picking that up. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we are a Nord. I won't go over this again, however, I will just hover over it quickly for you guys. Alright, last but not least, the champion points. So, I'm not going to go over too much in the green tree, however, I will go over a couple of nodes which I find very valuable. First is Rational. This adds 10 minutes to the duration per stage, so 30 minutes in total. So basically, anytime you use a food or drink, you'll get an extra 30 minutes on that duration. So that's just huge. It's something I take on every single build because it just makes your food last longer, which means you're using it less often. Next is liquid efficiency, and what this does is whenever you use a potion, you have a 10% chance not to consume it, which yet again just means you're using less of your potions overall and means you don't have to craft as many / buy as many, so that's really nice. And then finally, Steed's Blessing. This is increasing your movement speed by 20% while you're out of combat. So basically, in between ad pulls, when you run into the next one, you're going to be 20% quicker. So you're getting through stuff quicker. Next, let's talk about the blue tree. And first of all, I'm using Ironclad. This is reducing our damage taken by 3% per stage, so 6% in total from direct damage attacks. Next, we have Enduring Resolve, which is similar, but is for damage over time, so 6% damage once you have this fully leveled. Next, we have Duelist Rebuff, which is 6% damage from single target attacks. And then finally is Unassailable, which is 6% damage reduction from area of effect attacks. Now, I will also mention that you can take Bulwark if you want extra resistances. Personally, I would swap out Unassailable for Bulwark if you do want that. And another one is also Reinforced. It's not really that great. However, if you want a bit extra damage shields every now and again, this is something that you can take. It means you'll just take a little bit less damage every now and again. However, personally, these flat 6% buffs are enough for me. It means from all damage in the game, I'm going to be taking less damage. The two that I will say I wouldn't recommend swapping out is Duelist Rebuff and Ironclad, because most damage that's going to be hitting you the hardest will be single target and direct damage. So these ones I wouldn't swap out. However, you can mess around with some of ones in the tree. And obviously pick up all the passives. Any passive you can get is worth having, regardless of what it is. So just pick them all up. Finally, on to the red tree, and there's going to be quite a few different options here, and I will just go over a few of them. The main ones that I think are changeable are Bastion, because Bastion is what I'm using personally just to increase my Ignis shield. However, it's not that necessary. So that one 100% is something that you can change out. The main ones I will go over though is Brace and Anchor. This is something I take on all of my tanks because it gives me 20% block mitigation. Obviously, you get that nerf in your movement speed by 16%, but that 20% block mitigation is huge, so that's why I'm picking it up. Next, we have Boundless Vitality and Fortified. These ones, you're getting the extra armor, which is nice, and then the extra health. If you don't need the health, you can swap this out, so just keep that in mind. The one thing I will say as well is a lot of these ones are all interchangeable. As I say, I'm running Bastion at the moment because I was messing around with it. However, Rejuvenation is huge. Personally, I would actually recommend Rejuvenation over Bastion in general use. It's just giving you extra sustain. However, a few honorable mentions. Expert Evasion, amazing skill to have. Basically, every 30 seconds you're getting a free dodge roll, and as a tank, you're going to be dodge rolling stuff to mitigate certain damage. So that is a huge one. And then secondly, Slippery. Slippery is actually really underrated. It basically just breaks you free for no cost, and it can happen every 21 seconds, which is huge. It means one, you don't even need to focus as much on breaking free because this will break you free for no cost, and yeah, it just makes things easier sometimes. So that's another honorable mention. But the main ones that I will say to go for is Fortified, Boundless Vitality, Rejuvenation, and Brace and Anchor. Those are probably the main ones I would go for. Alright guys, that is the build, and thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye!